is a colored picture that actually matches the handout that's called The Lobes of the Brain. And I just wanted to go over it a little bit. So I mentioned that there's divisions of the brain: frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. I like to call it FPOT. I don't know why, but so FPOT being frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. So you start at the front. F-P-O-T. FPOT. So that's just my silly little way of remembering. So we have our frontal lobe. Okay. At the very end of the frontal lobe, it's separated by the central sulcus. So we have our frontal lobe goes all the way to the central sulcus. Right at the very end of the central sulcus is what we call the precentral gyrus. Remember I told you that everything in anatomy has two names? It's called the precentral gyrus or the primary motor cortex. It's a little bit easier. So this is motor function. Okay. Here again is the central sulcus, and at the beginning of the parietal lobe is the postcentral gyrus. So we have precentral, postcentral, which is also called the primary somatosensory cortex. So stuff, basically the information taken in this area is higher level processing. So touch, pain, position of your skin, temperature, all of that. Okay? So the end of the parietal lobe here, and now we have the occipital lobe. In the occipital lobe, we have our primary visual cortex, which basically processes all of our visual information. Okay? Now, here is our temporal lobe. And if you think about our temporal lobe and you think about a human head right here, what is right about here outside of our head is our ear. So then that gives you a clue. Your primary auditory cortex is right here. Now, here is our frontal lobe. And I know we really didn't talk about that much. So here we have our orbital frontal cortex. Now, that area of our brain has been associated with criminal activity, ADHD, does have some immaturity and kind of slower growth in the orbital frontal cortex. It's what allows us to think and plan, and same thing with the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So these both are involved in those sort of things. Now, I wanted to let you know that what separates these two, the frontal lobe from the temporal lobe, is the lateral sulcus. Right here, the lateral sulcus. Now, so we have the central sulcus, and then we have the lateral sulcus. Now, remember in the earlier video, I told you that there is a very large sulcus that separates the two sides of the brain, and that is called the longitudinal fissure. So again, we have the central sulcus, the lateral sulcus, and the longitudinal fissure. So, FPOT, frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal.